What's up, Bitcoiners? Welcome back. Welcome back. Despite the power being out yesterday, the sun was up. We know, we made it, we saw it. The sun's up again today. Bitcoin's running. All that's left to do is have a coffee, talk about what's new. Joe, it's a great morning. Oops, I may have got there. Yay. I got the wrong one, I think. It's a great morning. It feels good to be on the path. You're going to think, if you think you're on the right path now, wait until the end of this episode. We got the whole thing written down here. I think I figured it all out. We got hit me with the copium, please. Well, it's gonna be some. It's optimism, pure optimism, guys, pure optimism. But the real thing, based on reality. That's the good news. That's the good news. Good morning, Bitcoin Graffiti. Good morning, McTimmy. Good morning, McTimmy. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning, Dex. Morning, Kevin. The full power for the broadcast. Morning, Bud. Morning, CK. CK. Morning, Helios. Excellent, everyone. So where were we? We were in the middle of leading up to talking about David Sachs and the All In podcast. We're getting there. We had been talking a bit about Trump. We'll talk about him in a second. But there's big news today, so we got to start with that, right? What's the fakest news I could find? There's a whole bunch, right? There's a whole bunch. But the Djokovich story is pretty awesome, right? If you guys don't know, Novak Djokovich last year tried to participate in the Australian Open, and it was one of the biggest debacles ever. He arrived in Australia to play in the tennis mat in the tournament. He hadn't been vaccinated. He said, "Oh, well, I'll just quarantine." And they said that was fine at first, but instead they arrested him when he got there, and then he was stuck in a interrogation place. All the while, people didn't know this. There was a bit of a backstory to it. Now, we don't know the truth about what the motivations of all the parties were, but it turns out that the chief of staff to the Australian Prime Minister at the time was a former executive at Rio Tinto, the largest mining outfit in the world. I think one of them, one of the largest in the world, and they had major interest in the rare earth minerals found in, guess where, Serbia, Novak Djokovic's home country. So that had already become political, and Djokovic had joined the fight, saying, as we know, the thing about the rare earth minerals that we need for the batteries and all that, rare is a bit of a misleading term here. They're not rare in their overall coverage of Earth. It's not like uranium, where there's only a bit in certain places and you need to get those deposits because otherwise there's none, right? It's everywhere. The reason why they call it rare is because it's found in limited amounts in the Earth all over the planet, right? So it's available everywhere. It's just in small concentrations. So the type of mining required to get it out means moving a lot of dirt. Right? I was a big fan of the Gold Rush Alaska series. I still think someone in Bitcoin should copy the exact model of that show, by the way. If none of you have ever seen Gold Rush Alaska, you got it. It's amazing. It's just a bunch of guys. It actually came about just like Bitcoin at the end of the financial crisis in 2008. And it was people who were sort of broken, down and out, and they decided to just, with no experience, become gold miners. And because if you remember at the time, gold was shooting through the roof and it reinvigorated the mining industry. And they made a show about it. And I think for a while it was the most popular show on TV. I don't remember exactly, but it was fun because in the end it was mostly set in Yukon and you're mostly watching people, in a pioneering aesthetic, let's say, having to solve problems and something's broken, but there's no part that'll be there for 3 more weeks. And how do you fix it? They would machine their own parts, fix their own vehicles, keep moving dirt. Anyway, you get a real appreciation for moving dirt if you watch the show, basically. The reason why the show would work in Bitcoin is because the hook was at the end of every episode, they would actually weigh the gold. And it was really fulfilling, right? Even if it was a little amount, you would see like the fruits of their labor and everyone would be staring at this jar. Sometimes they moved a lot and it was really cool to watch, right? It just felt great. It was like better than anything you would see on a game show or something like that. These people, proof of work, had gotten the gold out of the ground and were celebrating. And when you understood what they had sacrificed and what they had done to solve problems way up there without any infrastructure and support, you really got a sense of their accomplishments. So neat show. I've thought for a while that the model could be applied to people in the industry. I've never quite understood how to do it. I've just known we could copy the Gold Rush Alaska model in Bitcoin, and I think have a really hot show on our hands. Anyway, so that's how I learned about moving dirt. And in the case of Serbia, they didn't want to do it because Serbia is one of these countries with a nice rolling hills and a nice countryside, and it's a very beautiful place, right? Really beautiful, near Croatia. Just if you're into the rural pastoral settings, it's nice, right? Uh, Not as flat as Ukraine, just pleasant to look at, right? Like Vermont, where I'm from, right? It kind of has a little bit of a feel to that. So he just didn't want his countryside ripped up and was against the Australian mining company coming in, turning it into a rare earth minerals hole in the ground. So when the whole Australia thing was going on last year, no one actually covered it from that angle, that the chief of staff was the person, more or less, the chief of staff on the political end had a direct tie to the economic interests that Djokovich was fighting in his home country, which had an Australian tie. So you didn't hear much about that last year, by the way. You just heard about how he didn't want a vaccine and he's the worst and this and that. But this is what makes it funny, right? So he wins this year, and now he's the greatest tennis player in the history of tennis players because he's tied the Spanish guy who always wins at the French Open, Nadal, right? He tied Nadal for the all-time lead, but he's got more in the tank. He can go do a few more tournaments if they let him in. They might not let him in America because he still isn't vaccinated. He didn't get to go to that one. I've been trying to get him to speak at a Bitcoin conference for quite a while now, ever since this thing in Australia happened. So I don't know if it'll work out this year. I've already checked the dates for the French Open. I think we're in the clear. I think it starts end of May, and I do believe he'll be allowed to go there. So I've put an ask in. I don't know to Bitcoin 2023, May 18th to 20th in Miami. I tried to get him at Europe last year. I know his foundation. It's all about education and major education track at our show this year. You know, one of my or signs that we're in the golden age of Bitcoin already is that educator celebrities. Right? They're celebrities now. It's pretty amazing thing that happened, right? That's how you know we're winning, that our educators are celebrities. From the foundation of all educative celebrity in our industry, Andreas Antonopoulos, the original celebrity educator in the space, set the path, right? And now from there, you've got a lot of folks who are just sort of educators who are famous for being educators. Right? That's what the whole thing's about. So anyway, Djokovich, here's why it's funny. Djokovich won the tournament, and guess who was in the stands? Guess who was in the stands? Our best friend Bill Gates, right? The picture of corporate health compared to Djokovich, who I think handled the whole thing perfectly. I really do. You know, this was a guy who said, you know, they tried a million different interviews, the social pressure on him. There's a ridiculous BBC interview out there that you can see where, why would you do it, Joker? Why would you give it all up? And he says, look, I'm not a scientist. I just know and am very particular about what I put in my body. I don't get sick because I am finely tuned, and he's a finely tuned machine. If you guys didn't know this, he has major dietary problems. He has a fat issue. He can't put on enough fat, and that led to his body breaking down regularly when he was starting in tennis. He couldn't make it to the end of a lot of tournaments because of dehydration and all the things that came along with his, very pristine health, right? So he's got dietary restrictions. He can't do everything. He's already got some limitations. So in order to compete at the highest level, he had to tune his caloric intake and his nutrition and all those stuff many years ago when he was very young. So we find him now as someone who really was at the cutting edge of all of this stuff in professional sports in terms of diet and how healthy you can eat and be. You know, I remember when I was a student in Montreal, I worked in a little Italian restaurant right on the main drag near the old Montreal Forum where the famous Montreal Canadiens play, and not too far from the new arena where they play these days. But a lot of players would come into this pasta joint to get their carbs before the game. And we would feed them, we would give them their meals out back. And it was kind of cool for me because I got to meet all the team all the time. And it was all different players that would come in, and it was real fun. But that was a time when they didn't know what they were doing, right? They were just eating whatever, like a bunch of carbs. They were doing their best for the information they had at the time, but it's nothing like what the next generation of athletes got into. In hockey in particular, there was a whole generation that came after that are just, total diet freaks. And it happened in every sport. Everyone became that way in the last 20 years. But Djokovic is one of the first to lead that change, and probably one of the best. So Djokovic, he did it. He won. And just watching the contrast, we talk about the contrast principle a lot on the show and how much the contrast principle can help you see through lies, I guess you could say, or see through a confusing, complicated scenario. When you put two things in contrast, the definition becomes clear. And they're not related, but Bill Gates next to at the Australian Open, sort of the guy who's become a symbol of the coordination of food and pharma and policy and man boobs and a belly. And we're not fat shamers on the show, but it's true, right? The contrast is important. And everyone's sort of hanging out with that meme these days about the picture of health and who would follow him. And it's been around for a while. I think Joe Rogan was one of the first people to bring that up when he's like, why are people even following this guy? Like, I'm not a doctor and he's not a doctor, yet everyone's pointing out that I'm not a doctor when I give health advice, yet I look pretty healthy. This is Joe Rogan's words. And then this guy, he gets all the credibility for being a medical professional, even though he's just a computer nerd and had nothing to do with health his whole life, right? Zero, absolutely nothing. So there you go. Oh, and I did have one better Moscow time story. Right? Actually, I'll get to it. I want to read one quote from Djokovic, right? Because this is, I think, sums up his entire experience. And this is something he said last year when he was going through all of his trouble. And he says, I am not up to what we see today in almost all modern countries in our so-called democratic civilization, added the Serb. More than politics, they seem like corporate interests to me. I am not prepared to talk about politics, but as a neutral observer, I say that we lost true democracy many years ago. Today, business matters more, partisan interests, and I don't find myself there, right? What a perfect answer from Djokovic, right? He didn't, the football player who we had at our show, Bitcoin 2022, Aaron Rodgers, right? I got a lot of time for Aaron Rodgers. He's of a similar mode as Djokovic, where he had principles and he took a stand and he got criticism for it and all that stuff is great. There's one major difference between the two of them and how they handled it, and I think it's telling about who we should continue to look to for guidance on all of this stuff. So, big fan of Aaron Rodgers. Happy he came and spoke at Bitcoin 2022. But the difference between him and Djokovic is he went with, I didn't take the vaccine because I did my own research. Okay, Aaron Rodgers, you did your own research. Great. That doesn't work. And it doesn't work for you. It doesn't work for me. You could say for all those reasons why you didn't want to take it. I agree with that, right? But saying that like you had the capacity to understand this whole scene on a scientific level is not true, right? It's just not true. It's not possible. And I'm not saying he's lying. He just showed the limitations of his own understanding of the game, right? Djokovic, with this answer, I think captures it all, right? He just says, I see a corporate messaging system and I'm not interested. Perfect. Absolutely perfect, right? So there you go. So this was in the running for Moscow time. I just want to add it before we get into some of our other stuff today on our board. But this was funny, right? The New Zealand. So we're in Australia. We're going to move over to New Zealand now. The Prime Minister, who we've mentioned several times, right, Jacinda Ardern, who is going to be in her post in a week. There's lots of stuff being written about this transition and what's going on because she was kind of a celebrity for their country. Says, here's an article that Jacinda Ardern will need more election than any prime minister in New Zealand's history, right? So saying that it was so divisive or she faced a lot of people and there's a lot of anger towards her, is I guess what they're getting at, right? But the comments of this said, well, I got an idea for Jacinda, right? I got an idea. Why doesn't she just stay home for the next couple of years and not talk to her neighbors, and then no one will know she won't be in any danger anymore? Right? That's a good. That's a good idea, Jacinda. Just stay home. What are you worried about it for? Right? It's easy. Just stay home. Right? Just stay home. Don't talk to your neighbors. Don't let anyone know you're there, and you won't need so much security. It's fine. You're gonna be okay. You're gonna be fine, Jacinda. All right. Did anyone catch some of David Sachs' tweets over the past few days? Now, David Sachs, if you guys don't know who he is, he's one of the original PayPal mafia fellas, right? So he worked with Peter Thiel and Elon Musk and all these folks. Now, I've been an event programmer for 2016 was my first consensus that I programmed. So what are we at? 7 years of event programming, right? Event programming. I got a lot right over my time. I got a lot right? I helped invent the Wall Street version of a Bitcoin show in 2017. Before that, Bitcoin events were thought of as engineering or political events. I was one of the first people to frame the whole thing in Wall Street only language, right? And a lot of copiers came after that. I got the NFT thing right. Whether we like it or not, I had different ideas of how to do it, but I incorporated it into consensus in 2018 already, where instead of swag bags, I created a wallet as part of the navigation of the show, and you would get swag issued as NFTs, which would drive traffic to the physical booths, and you could trade them there, and it worked, right? So, and in doing so, I actually incubated the NYC NFT event, which became the biggest event, I think, for NFTs in the world. They helped me with the wallet. They helped sort of plug all that stuff in, and we gave them some publicity, and they blew up, right? So all this to say is I was early on it, not because I believed in the technology or anything like that, right? I've shared the frame before. I just look at human capital as it leaves its formative, money-making, professionalized containers or practices, right? Like Wall Street people defecting into Bitcoin in the early days. I said, well, we can have a Wall Street event now, right? Just like it started with engineers, the cryptographers who came, and then they were engineering, privacy, cryptography events, and then the political people started peeling out of politics. That's how I saw it. I worked as a professional in politics and saw professional people being drawn to Bitcoin and said, well, what's going on here, right? So a lot of events at the time that were around that libertarian approach, those were very popular Bitcoin events in those early days. But then the Wall Street people came, and I said, well, there's going to be an event for them too. And the same thing, once I saw all the Pepe artists and all of that happening in 2015, 2016, I said, well, this is going professional too, right? It's the same reason why in 2023 now I'm putting so much focus on energy and energy aspects for our event, and we're going to be talking about energy a bit more today. But energy remains one of the most important industries that Bitcoin is about to just totally flip on its head and change and alter and reform and reshape and dominate, really, right? That's what we're going to talk about. And so energy literacy, just like the folks on this show, I'd say our audience is one of the most energy literate audiences in the world. Everyone who comes together for this show, I mean, we are at the forefront of understanding all kinds of changes in energy. We're going to talk about some of the big changes today, stuff that no one else is talking about, but that we see clearly, and things that are coming. We hope that everyone who comes to Bitcoin 2023 becomes as energy literate as everyone who watches this show. It's one of our main focuses. So all of that bragging now about what I did do right in events, let me tell you about what I did wrong, right? Because it wasn't all good, right? I got some stuff right. And the biggest thing I ever got wrong, the biggest thing, not even close, was David Sachs. Right? David Sachs, when he was a VC, and wasn't really that political, I thought he was just another one of these San Francisco dilettantes asking me for stage time in New York because he wanted to pump bag and all this kind of stuff. I didn't understand who he was yet. And he wasn't really showing his cards either, right? Or hadn't changed or hadn't done whatever. But I basically slow rolled him a few times. I got him as a speaker in the end, but it was never anything great. It was just like a panel and a thing, and and it was really just me tucking him somewhere because he kept asking, and I didn't know what to do. And I was like, I hate to say it, this is how wrong I was. I was like, oh, this guy, right? But boy, oh boy, it's the biggest mistake I ever made ever. It's not even close, right? It's not even close. This is like I had him so wrong, so wrong. And I don't like to admit that, but it's the truth. I had him 100% wrong. So what do I like about him? Well, it started around the 2020 election where he just started going against the grain a bit and started saying what he thought rather than what would have him loved by his other San Francisco contemporaries, right? And now we see him, he's one of the main backers of Elon's newest Twitter venture. He was just with Dave Rubin. If you guys don't know Rubin Report, it's one of the biggest podcasts in the world. He's also now, by weird circumstance, one of the larger owners of Rumble because he started the Locals platform, which was a subscription service for broadcasting because he believed he was shadow banned on YouTube and Twitter. And in the end, we'll get to it, he definitely was shadow banned and still is. So Dave Rubin started Locals as a workaround. If you don't know who Dave Rubin is, he's the guy who always interviews Jordan Peterson on Jordan Peterson's Roadshow. He's like the guy who passes him the ball, basically, right? About the book tour and all that stuff. So he's interviewed Jordan Peterson, 200 times, and has his main studio, I think, in LA. I'm not sure. Anyway, he went up the other day to figure out because he believes he's still shadow banned and went into the Twitter offices and poking around, and David Sachs helped him with one of his biggest helps on the thing. And it turned out that they certainly were still. It looks like basically the finding was the code base at Twitter. They called it a fractal of a Rube Goldberg machine. So even the best engineers who are completely incentivized now to get it right, with Elon Musk right there watching, helping, doing what they can, they continue to think that it's a Jenga thing. They pull one block out, the whole thing might come down. It was even told to Dave Rubin they might just have to start over, right? They might not be able to, which is good for Nostr. We're gonna loop back to this point in a second, right? But so when David Sachs started opening up, he did it in a way that was both accurate, not incendiary, still based in reality in a sense, not just trying to heat people's brains up, and looks like he's doing his best and is an honest shooter, right? Here's, for example, him criticizing Bill Gates just now, but not even so much Bill Gates. He's criticizing folks who would continue to use the corporate messaging sphere in order to promulgate things that maybe Bill Gates says. So here's what he says. Problems with current vaccines, according to Bill Gates, right? They don't block infection. They're not broad. So when new variants come up, you lose protection, very short duration, especially for old people, right? So that's just him not jumping in on this, oh, Bill Gates is the devil, but saying, here's Bill Gates, what he says, and why aren't they copying what he's saying these days, right? Why was it okay to copy what Bill Gates said and repeat his quotes a year ago, but now, right, the Bill Gates at the Australian Open, who's had a change of mind about what the vaccines can do and do and all that, where's that reporting, right? I am on Nostr. I did share my pub the other day, but I'm still poking around. I'm still not ripping on it, but I have it. I will share my Nostr again. Thank you, Justin. Definitely will. The All In gang had a great podcast this weekend. So not only is David Sachs, sort of leading the charge on Twitter. The All In podcast, which he's a part of, right, is making more and more of let's call it thought leadership, but more and more of a presence in the overall discussion, right? So, first of all, he pointed out on the show that he hates to admit it, right, that Trump is not his preferred candidate and never was, but he's literally the only person talking about no World War III and a peace deal, right? So he's one of the only people who's come out and said that, right? So not many people giving Trump much attention, which looks deliberate, but here he is saying, look, not my guy, but he's literally the only one saying that, right? They also all said, so David Sachs is part of the All In podcast, right, with Chamath and Jason Calacanis and David Freiberg. I still think It's not even close. That this podcast, although it has become one of the most popular in the world, is completely being led by David Sachs. I think everyone else is part of the band. They help the whole conversation go. But at this point, I'm willing to say that David Sachs is sort of the lead singer-songwriter of the band, right? It doesn't work without him. He's the reason why this thing comes together. But anyway, they all said on their show this weekend, no booster shots for any of them, right? So right away, this is a major change as far as a mainstream type of voice headed out and catching people, right? Quite different, quite different. He also, of course, underlines on the show everything that went on with the Twitter files, the latest one. Yeah, agreed. He's the contrarian, yeah, of the group, but he's usually right. Exactly. Here's him talking about the latest Twitter files, right? That it's widely repeated claims of the Russian disinformation were all based on bogus data, right? This is the Twitter files from 2 days ago that we covered. And that Twitter knew it was false, right? Twitter was aware. Even Yoel Roth, who, of course, most people are, hate him, and probably for good reasons, right? We're not sold on Yoel Roth being an agent of evil, but maybe, right? We don't really know. But from what we saw, he was even willing to push back on the Hamilton 68 and all of the agents' operations that were using Twitter's name in order to mainstream media. So here's what he says. It was the bogus data that everyone on Twitter knew was false. In other words, the political partisans and pundits claiming to protect you against disinformation were most likely the ones spreading it, which we know here, right? Which we've known for a long time. But one of the most interesting things they talked about on their show, on the All In podcast, was they dug deep into this new Google case against this new government case against Google for the antitrust stuff, right? So we mentioned that the day it happened 4 or 5 days ago, whenever it was, right? We saw it right away that morning. We brought it up, said this is a really big deal, and they covered it and made some predictions on it, right? So they made some predictions on it. So here's what they say, right? And we're actually going to use this to sort of explain what's going on the board today, right? This is what's going on the board today. So here's what he says, right? Joshua Steinman, if you guys don't know, at Joshua Steinman, had one of the best breakdowns of this. And here's what he said. And this is part of the All In podcast. So this is him reacting to the All In podcast. Ops against the beast is what he call it. Walking through high-end ops to deal with activity like lawsuits. Because high stakes games are rarely about finding truth and justice, right? So he says this is what we learned from the All In podcast with the DOJ suing Google, right? So the DOJ is trying to unwind 2 key Google acquisitions that took place over a decade ago around their advertising business. And this is what the All In podcast starts to underline and what Josh Steinman is helping us understand here. He says, how do normal top tier players run influence ops to prevent the worst from happening, right? So we're looking at influence ops here. And that's what Josh Steinman says here. So he says, if you read American Influence 101, so he's referring to something he wrote last November when the SBF story broke. He says, you learned, which we brought up at the time, we covered Joshua Steinman then, you learned that combined press, policy, lobbying, influence ops are big business in Washington. SBF and FTX were likely operating in this space, given the very favorable treatment they were getting in the media and on the Hill. Now, we saw that all in real time, remember. Everyone can see the sausage being made. That's what made the FTX story so different. Most people's eyes had opened up enough to actually get a gander at the real story that we could see with SBF and FTX, right? The truth and beauty aspect of it. Remember what he said, SBF, truth and beauty. You don't need to look further than what you see, right? It's a circular amount of thinking. What you see, truth is beauty and beauty is truth, right? It's a simple way. Don't dig too deep. It's all there. You don't need confirmation. That's what truth and beauty means, right? And this is what Joshua Steinman is saying. It's all there, right? We can see the combined press, policy, lobbying influence. And what you see with the dollar system, right, is really that. You see the money entering the political realm here. And then the entropy that's already set up in our system just means it's like a toxic ooze that slimes, from here and drips down in its slimy way into the media bracket, right? So this is where the politics begin, and then that's where you get into the communications part, right? And that's this completely slanted and spun and filled with toxic ooze talking points get redirected and really designed to just heat people's brains, right? We talked about heating the other day in TikTok, how they have a button that is literally called heating, right? It heats up the virality of a TikTok post, but it's really just heating up people's brains, right? This is direct. Uh, um, if you would do one of those maps of people's brain activity when they were watching TikTok, you can see, right? Especially when it's stuff like this. So that's what you have. You have this cycle of ooze between press, policy, lobbying, and eventually the consumer, who is rarely aware of what's going on, right? It's really just what feelings do you get that are generated from the relationships formed between media, government, and the money system, right? So it spins around and around. It's toxic ooze. It gets involved in everything, and the entropy that made it all gummed up with this garbage, right? So this is what he says, right? We're going to go a little deeper, right? And talk about how it comes down to. And he says this is what it looks like: defend your friends, attack your enemies. Everything else is a detail, right? And what he means is defend your friends. These scenarios are almost never about a specific company. They're about sending a message. You need to reframe the issue as us versus them, right? You need to reframe the issue as us versus them. If you're doing your job well, and we covered it in American Influence 102, you've already got an army of proxies conditioned to carry this message both officially and unofficially. Time to activate them, right? This is all about changing hearts and minds. How do you activate this army? Start by indirectly disseminating talking points. These can be put out by industry groups, your own policy shop, other company leaders, independent academics. This is information laundering, right? We've talked about information laundering for a long time. That's how you do it. You get someone to say it, then you refer to it, right? Information laundering. So you can get any of these folks doing it, right? Next, you need to make sure the media that these folks are generating is getting amplified. So influencers retweet, morning briefing, emails, they go to MSNBC, then they get into the echo chamber. Once it's in the echo chamber, right, and it's bounced around between them, you're winning, right? Then you can attack your enemies, right? Now you essentially run the same gameplay as above, but in reverse. You go after an aggressor, you question their motives, you question their patriotism, you question their tactics, and so on, right? Going negative is sensitive, and you best do it with your proxies, right? So the pros do this by sheltering efforts with a law firm, and then you get attorney-client privilege. That's what Russiagate was built on. And what you basically do from there is you, as he describes it, right? We're at the start of a years-long battle between the DOJ and Google, and both sides have veritable armies trying to shape the cognitive landscape, right? Trying to shape the cognitive landscape. And that's what the All In podcast basically suggested. We're going to see a tremendous amount of fighting here and a tremendous amount of resources. And you're going to see people cast in this light and in that light and all kinds of different ways. And you can already see this top level tier. Let's look at TikTok, right? Everyone talking about it. The TikTok execs are going to have to come testify in Congress, and they're going to ban it soon, right? They're saying Biden is going to ban it maybe. Well, here's NBC News, right? Here's corruption at work. This is it. You can see it. It's clear, right? This is a headline today in NBC News today, right? And if you believe Glenn Greenwald about NBC News, it's been an op for a long time, right? That's Glenn Greenwald's entire worldview. Probably right. Here's senior TikTok executives and their lobbyists have been briefing members of Congress, academic researchers, think tank writers, and others about a $1.5 billion effort that they call Project Texas. Project Texas. Come on. It's pretty good branding, right? It's pretty good branding. Yeah, you like the toxic ooze? Yeah, I thought you guys would like it. It's toxic ooze. That's what it is. It is. The analogy is not over. It's going to get better. It's going to get better. My picture doesn't do it justice this morning. So what is TikTok doing? Exactly what Josh Diamond says. Now, I know we're talking about Google, but we're talking about top-tiered efforts, right? So it doesn't matter what brand. Are they capable of a top-tier effort? So what have they done here? Us versus them. So now all of a sudden, TikTok has a Project Texas. Texas. What's more American than Texas, right? Project Texas. Yeah, fucking right. Where's my guns? Next, they're going to have Operation Freedom, 2A or something like that, right? It's all bullshit. It's complete bullshit, right? This is the toxic ooze working itself, right? Look at the slime. Senior TikTok executives, you don't need to talk anymore about what's going on at TikTok. What could be the excuse? We know it's a brainwashing tool. They're all brainwashing tools, but this one's a little worse because we don't know who's behind it, and you can't arrest who's behind it, and you can't even know what's going on, right? You can't subpoena any of these people. The people coming to Congress in March or whatever don't matter. It's owned by the CCP. We know it. You don't need to learn more. There's nothing more you need to learn than that, right? And once you understand the quality of the machine they built, it's the best. It's not even close. It's better than Twitter. It's better than Instagram. Better than all of them. How do we know? Well, look how many brains are on fire. That's all you need to know. How many brains are on fire for this, right? That's the goal of the machine, to light your brain on fire. It is the best. There's nothing else like it. Nothing. And we've known this for a long time. The data security thing, we've talked about that for a long time as a diversion, get everyone to focus on data security. That's probably what they're going to be lobbying everyone about. They've taken efforts to prevent data security and leakage and blah, 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 blah. Really boring diversionary. But that's what a top tier thing looks like. Now, the good news. Right? Here's how we're going to win. And this is the best part of all of this. Look at the way this model works with the amount of lost, inefficient coordination. Right? That's the slime. That's why it comes out as an ooze. That's why it drips down and gums up everything that it touches and becomes less and less capable of actually completing the circle, right? More and more people drop off here. I mean, who after 2020 now really believes that the Republic, other than in the spirit and in our hearts and minds, is still alive? How many believe that? Not a lot, right? How many people who used to be so patriotic they would never question paying taxes in order to keep the machine running think that today? The number's different. I don't have the numbers in front of me, right? No one's done that research, but I can tell you anecdotally that all those MAGA people who probably would have been the most patriotic Americans ever 4 years ago, they're not so interested in paying taxes anymore. You get that, right? They're not really playing the game like it used to be. I remember in the days after the 2020 election, and I had a friend who just hated Trump and hated all of it, but he knew what was going on. He could tell something was not good. He goes, "I just want it all to go away," right? And I said, "Oh well, like maybe." I think they're gonna the MAGA people are, you know, they're gonna accept what's happening. And he says, "Oh, I just want sports and all these things." I said, "Oh, wait a minute. You think they're going to go back to being the same they were? No, that's not how it's going to happen. They're going to forget about what happened in 2020 and move on, but they're not rejoining society the way they were before. They're not going to fill up your stadiums and be your friends and all that. That's going to change." And he hadn't really thought of it that way. And I said, "Yeah, like these people are going to check out of America. The ones who loved it the most are going to check out the first." You didn't see that coming, right? And he saw it there as a liberal person, said, "Oh shit, like the overall participation in society is going to go down as a result of this." And I think that's the case, right? Now, media, right? Who can, other than those who are totally hypnotized, ever even be near this stuff anymore, right? We know that you shouldn't even expose yourself to it. Like I hope people who watch the show have taken the opportunity to consume less mainstream media, because I'm trying to filter out the stories for you, and you should be up to date as far as what's going on in the world, and not feel like you're lost, right? And that big stories are hitting you, right? That's the reason why we followed anyway on Twitter or any of these things. But I hope on this show anyway, we can help you ignore the stories that you shouldn't be paying attention to in the first place, right? Like some of these, especially the Proud Boys and the Antifa stuff, right? This is sports. This is the diversion that everyone was talking about, that Joshua Steinman was talking about at the beginning, right? How did that happen all of a sudden this weekend that we got Antifa back? Where did that come from, right? There's a lot of other stuff going on that we're not talking about because we watched the sport, and it's always looked like a sport from the minute the George Floyd stuff started. What did I see? I saw people wearing uniforms and it being covered like a sporting event. There's no drama in sports anymore, even though there was a big football game in America last night and blah, blah, blah. The Super Bowl is coming. The drama in sports is gone, as far as I can tell, in North American sports, or at least they don't dramatic to me the way they before World War III started, right? I used to be like, oh, big game tonight, Montreal Canadiens, whoa, I love baseball. I still can passively watch sports here and there, but I don't think of it as dramatic anymore. Not like what's going on in the world, right? It looks like what it should look like, just a bunch of men running around doing their best to stay professionals in a very competitive environment, right? Good for them, right? I'm not criticizing the actual athletes at all. That's fine. But what we see is people not as interested in following it, people not as interested in the drama of it. Now, there's still plenty of people around following, right? The stadiums are packed. People still like having fun. None of that's going away. But the unquestioning, even the national anthem parts, right? How much has that changed in America over the last a lot. So, because of this, oozing system, the failures of it are not just from the entropy and the lost coordination in messaging. It starts to hit. And this is where our next stories are going to come in. It starts to hit the energy stuff, right? So here's what's going on in the world, and here's where this model has brought us, right? So we know there's the energy crisis in Europe. It's caused in the end, the whole messaging around our liquid natural gas in America was really because we're selling it to foreign markets for much more expensive, much higher prices. That's why it's going up in America. And the reason why people don't, talk about the price going up as much is that attention immediately gets diverted onto other things like don't use a propane stove, right? And you have Ron Paul, who, in the context of all of this stuff going on, right, said the following, right? If government lies about COVID and the vaccines, lies about the reasons for wars and how the wars are going, do you think they tell the truth about inflation? No, of course not, right? And people are coming to that realization. And it's not just inflation. When we see the people question the prices of gas, right? No, don't use a stove, you're bad, right? What about what's going on in Pakistan, right? Rolling blackouts. Why? They sold their energy to the rich countries, to all the pension plans of Europe that have to keep the lights on for another winter, right? Did you know this? This is America in a nutshell. This is the corruption. So that's what's going on with one part of our energy. This I had no idea about. What I'm about to tell you, I had no clue about. I'm not out there following every piece of U.S. energy infrastructure, but this is true, right? This is from Augustus. I looked it up. More than 1,600 dams have been deconstructed in the last 30 years in America. The trend is accelerating, and American water infrastructure is becoming even less drought resistant, right? They've demolished dams. They've taken them all down. Of course, it's always the habitat and blah, 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 right? So, but that's not even the worst, right? That's just the American system. China Uncensored just did a expose on all of the infrastructure the Chinese have financed around the world through the Belt&Road initiative. And the simulation is winking at us because we're going to get to volcanoes and failure in South America in 1 second. Right? So just understand that contrast principle again and where we're going to head. So this is what's going on in the world based on Chinese energy projects combined with the Belt and Road. If you don't know what the Belt and Road is, it's the remaking of the Silk Road, both at sea and on land, to connect China across the Middle East and the Stands to Europe and Africa. Right. So great idea. Right. Great idea. I want to see that built. I want to be able to take such transportation across Asia. No problem with it at all. Can't wait for it to be built. Okay. But the CCP, of course, can't do anything right. The incentive model is totally crazy, and everything they built is breaking. Here's what China Uncensor said. Right. So, first of all, Pakistan, who we said already has no natural gas, rolling blackouts. Well, why? Well, the Chinese built them a dam not long ago. What happened to it? Well, doesn't work. Full of cracks, right? Had to be shut down. And there's tons of protests around it. So what did the Chinese people who built it do? They abandoned it, right? They said the Pakistani police can't offer credible security against the protests about how the dam doesn't work, which they failed to build. Right? These were all called gunboat diplomacy, where they would come in and loan money. Right? So Beijing loans money, and they're the largest government lender in the developing world by far. Right? And then when they try to get the money back, they jack up the rates. They take possession of infrastructure, ports, whatever else they built. The problem is they're not building anything good. Right? Here's another one in Uganda. They built a hydro plant, shut down, broken, too many cracks. Right? This is already in 2022. Another one in Ecuador, right? The first in Ecuador. We're going to get to the other parts in Ecuador. 500 construction defects, right? Another one in Uganda, cracked. Other one for, I didn't see that one. There's a Wall Street Journal article right now. Global mega projects falling apart, right? The Ecuador one gets hilarious. It was complained about the moldy ceilings, the poor construction. Rafael Correa, who was sort of a comms fella who made this deal a few years ago, he's in jail now for corruption, obviously. And he got $18 billion from China during his time, right? So this is a quote out of the article, Ecuadorian lawmakers, former government ministers, and anti-corruption activists say the loans lack transparency? No. With contracts given to companies without public bids resulting in shoddy construction, high costs, and grift, right? So the president's in jail. They bought a supercomputer. It's just out in the rain. It's been there for a couple of years, sitting outdoors, unused. The erosion around the actual dam. So they built a dam next to a volcano, right? So they built a dam next to a volcano. But then the volcano is still active. So the erosion around it that would normally take thousands of years after they built the dam and whatever else is going on through it has now happened in 5 years. And the dam probably will break any day. This is what one person living there, we could lose everything. And we don't know if it's tomorrow or in 6 months. On this dam they built next to the volcano in Ecuador, 17,000 cracks already. 17,000 cracks. It doesn't run. They can't run it. So they built all of this stuff, right? And none of it's going to work. None of it. So where does that leave us, right? Well, look at what this looks like, right? The ooze comes in here. The influence comes in here. No one sees anything. In the end, your brain is all hot. And let me just get this out so I can compare. But in Bitcoin, right, instead of this government institution, you have a decentralized network, right? Instead of having to listen to the rules, which can be corrupted and manipulated to get more money by using the communications network in order to convince people to give you more money again, right? You have this network that does nothing more than shine a light, right? You have complete visibility on it. Now, as we have opened up this market for energy in order to power proof of work and our decentralized network and the whole P2P model, what happens next is we need energy, right? So because Bitcoin illuminates, because it is transparent, we can see the coordination very easily between our network and the energy sources that are used to power it, right? It's a very obvious feedback loop, a clear one, right? Very little toxic ooze, very little entropy can enter that scenario, very little, because we can see it all, right? And so that's how you're going to get the financing of nuclear power and small hydro dams. Who are we competing against? Right? That's all that matters in the end. We're competing against the US government and the Chinese government when it comes to the provision of energy and making energy companies richer? Are they going to go with mega projects that have 17,000 defects with money that doesn't make any sense, that no one is going to keep taking around the world, that none of these developing countries are going to want to see again ever, right? After all this, do you think the Chinese can just go back and say, hey, let's do a deal again with our more fake money? I doubt it. I doubt it, right? Now, people are dumb enough, it's totally possible. I'm not saying it's over today, but the illumination of the whole system that we can actually have transparent energy production because we have transparent money allows us to basically see the whole feedback loop much clearer. And therefore, we can actually optimize for the correct amount of energy. And again, all we're competing against are clown world stuff, right? It's clown world. If they can't build a dam, if they're ripping dams apart, if they're already down to complaining about the dam protesters and complaining about what are we going to do about the propane stoves, and this is their whole tactic. That's all they got. That's it, right? They're not building the energy infrastructure we need. They say they're going to. They just approved the nuclear reactors for the small modular thing in America. But someone's got to buy them. What is it going to be? One of our bankrupt cities or one of our bankrupt states or our $30 trillion in debt federal government? It's none of them. They're not going to be able to get off their ass and understand they're too filled with toxic sludge in their eyes and all around them to ever understand what is actually happening. But because our system does create transparency and the proper feedback loops, it might seem small, but it's a compounding effect. We get one energy station right without cracks. We get two energy stations right without cracks, right? And one could imagine that happening when you do have people aligned around the right incentives. We know how to build an energy system. We know how to build this stuff well that doesn't crack. We've done it before. We can do it again, and we're going to do it again, right? So in the end, it's just about getting it right day by day, doing it every day, getting it one station, two stations, small, gridless in Kenya, right? They'll start here in America soon. We got Texas with the tax incentives coming. We've got New Hampshire understanding load balancing of the grid. And it's going to catch on. And we're going to understand the feedback loop of the energy industry because we're going to make the energy industry rich, right? It has now become your patriotic duty in order to win World War III to get rich. Unfortunately, it's no longer like a thing where, oh, that would be nice. Do it. You have to do it to destroy the previous system. And, let's all get rich. I'm into it, right? But it's an important distinction. We got to get this stuff right, and we got to win, and then we'll shift to a Bitcoin standard because they simply can't even build one station. If China is an example, I don't think America's that different. Now, I think it's still possible. I would trust the Japanese firm to go and build one of these things, I think. But with Chinese money being what it is, with their political system being what it is, it's got even more toxic sludge than ours, I think. And therefore, no one is incentivized to do the right thing. Because ours is, illuminates, we can actually get these things done, right? Yeah. Here's the, don't worry, the American contracts that built the dams got their paychecks. Yeah. Mm-hmm. You can't have Ninja Turtles with spilling a little toxic ooze. Yeah, a little bit of ooze, right? Secret of the ooze. My state government has removed $800 million from maintenance for water infrastructure. Yeah, I agree. So one of the benefits, I certainly don't have it here on this island. The water situation is not great here, not bad. But where I live in Quebec, I mean, obviously we're max water. Did you know that that's a weird thing about New York's situation where it is? The water supply is immaculate in New York City, and that's the reason why the city was able to grow the way it did. It has so much water. For if you look at the climate maps and all that, the very tip of Brooklyn is like the end of the coastal subtropical zone. New York City is where it switches. The minute you get inland, no, it's now the bottom of the temperate climate. and the tropical stuff, just goes up the coast. But for a subtropical, nearly subtropical climate, and that, the definition of subtropical here being the most mathematical one, I don't think anyone thinks New York City actually intellectually is subtropical. But the bottom of Brooklyn, basically the bottom of Long Island, gets frozen, days under freezing, the depth of the frost line, all those mathematical definitions mean it's not. And I saw it a million times because I lived in Brooklyn, and it would be snowing up in Westchester or up the river when those guys come in, and it would just be raining in Brooklyn, right? It was always that, because it's on the ocean, it's just a little warmer. So the subtropical sort of climbs up the side. And so it's very rare that a city in such a warm climate has as much water, fresh, pristine northern mountain spring water, that something like New York City has. And that's why they can run the fire hydrants all summer. They can, they have all the sky. Believe it or not, had a big thing to do with the skyscrapers. It wouldn't have been possible. Hey CK. CK says, share with your show, fam. We need 100 Bitcoiners in here, indeed. Enmity. Smashed. Smash the like button. We love it. What we got here? And I'm looking at Parallel World. Everything you're saying makes it clear. Yeah. Look, a lot of psyops going on, guys. That's what the show's about, right? A lot of psyops. And if fiat is toxic ooze, then what's Bitcoin to our brains? Well, that's what. There it is. If it's toxic ooze, Bitcoin is light. It's light, right? It is light. It illuminates, and that's the difference, right? One will cover your eyes and sludge. The other will illuminate and brighten dark corners, which is what we're trying to do, right? We thought science could do it at one time. Wrong. Science alone won't handle it. You need science plus incentive models, and then it's possible, right? And then it's possible. All four of them were very vocal advocates of the initial boosters. Yeah, happy to see they're finally catching on. Yeah, they sure were, right? And that's what I mean. The whole change of the largest VC now getting wise to all of this, right? Like, don't underestimate this. We're talking about energy, right? This is an important way to loop the show in, right? We're talking about energy. Understand that the most influential VC podcast in the world has now gone based. They have, right? They're advocating Trump, sort of. They're telling you you've been lied to. Everything's a lie. And these guys can deploy a lot of capital. I have a history with Chamath. I booked Chamath for an event in 2017. So first of all, Chamath is Canadian. I don't know if you guys know that. He went to the same college as me, and we both went. He was a few years ahead of me, but we both went before. In Canada, we not that Americans have to know it, but we have our analogy system for our colleges. McGill is Harvard, blah blah blah, right? Waterloo is our Stanford. But when we went there in the 90s, people didn't really know that, right? I went in 99, 2000 really. People didn't really know that. Some people said it, but it was kind of a weird thing for someone from Boston, Montreal, who went to a junior college next to Harvard, McGill, and I chose not to go there because basically I wanted this new experience at this college, which I thought was going to get a lot of reputation going forward, and I was right. It became a big deal. And Chamath went there as well just before me, and then went down to San Francisco to make his fortune. And so I booked him to interview him in 2017, but it was right in the middle of the last minute, which drove me crazy. And then and I booked him again to interview him, and he dropped out again. So I had kind of written him off, right? As far as being serious about any of this stuff. And then, his level of concern about the Uyghurs comment made me just like so angry at him. But now, let's forget him, right? It seems like he's Sachs lead, and he could be a help. So let him back in. Even though he created Surfer Jim, who we love, right? We love. I was like one of the first people to reach out. I didn't personally do it, but I had consensus and events, and everyone reach out to Surfer Jim immediately for the when he got into the Chimoff fight. You know, I knew he was going to be a keeper. All right, team. That's all I got for today. Some horses. Novak is based. Yeah, this is good. I forgot I didn't get Justin's on. He won. How is that possible? He just got. I love it. I love it. I love it. Yeah. Oh yeah, it's true. Enmity is from Melbourne. I remember where this embarrassment all happened and where the unvaccinated were treated so badly. It meant so much. I bet it did. Well, I'm glad. I'm glad, Enmity. I'm glad he got to see it. It was amazing. Huh? Yeah. As I put in my title, he made a Djokovich of Australia. Right. I was trying to work off joke of its. If anyone didn't catch my writing. All right, team. Here's this. Yeah, P-Man Van. I've been keeping the. I'm going to put the description in the link for the show for tickets, and I will be able to get, I think, our own code and stuff for Breakup fans. So you'll get that. And, what happens when the people that built the original toys are known to be are able to maintain them and build new ones while their kids that inherit? The good news about hydro and nuclear, frankly, any idiot. I mean, monkeys can run it, right? I've been saying this about Quebec for a long time. One of the reasons, the Quebec, I'm going to do a show soon on this family history thing that I learned from What is Alt Hist. But basically, you can understand the politics of every part of the world by the family structures that they've been promoting and living with for years. And I never understood the connection. I always felt the connection between Quebec, Korea, and Japan, and to a certain extent, Ireland. They're all max primogeniture societies in that they demand everything go to the oldest male heir, which creates the reality of other men in the family accepting the unfair world, also being obsessed with their genealogy, their history, their background, right? What Irish person does, oh, I'm Irish, right? The Korean and the Japanese and the Quebecers are all the same about that, all the same. And what it does is it makes peacock males, right? Because the males are now, they have to stand out. They can't just inherit, right? They've got to stand out. It creates very clear male-female roles in a society. In Quebec, none of this stuff is going on with the gender and all that. It's just not happening, right? They don't care. Like, they're not interested. Like you can say in France has a bit of it. France is very mixed, right? As far as all these family things, it's all sort of there. But in France, you can just say, "Oh, women." I remember. This is mean, but it's true. I remember years ago when I was a student in France, right? And France was the world champion soccer team at the time. And, just saying, "Oh, why don't you Canadians and Americans play any soccer, blah, blah, blah." And I said, "Well, our girls play." And he goes, "Play soccer." And that was like, he didn't even get, like, in America, you get in trouble saying that kind of thing around a lady. Of course you would, right? I wouldn't say that around a lady, like just make fun of the whole sport like that. Well, I would do it just for maybe to get a reaction and to tease, but he just said it matter of fact. They don't know. And you get that sort of a little bit of chauvinism in these systems. And so all this to say, Quebec will, like the Koreans, the Irish, the Japanese, they're never letting go. They're going to live forever. They're obsessed with the maintenance of their people. There's enough of these peacock males that will keep any hydro dam going. And the good news is they're so simple. They built them. It's just gravity. As long as they still have gravity in Quebec, we're going to have unlimited electricity and energy in our state forever, I believe. So there you go. All right. Peace, everyone. Have a great day.